May 1945. Germany surrenders. Across Europe, American soldiers climb from their Sherman tanks for what many believe will be the last time. Nearly 50,000 of these steel warriors had rolled off American assembly lines. But as the guns fell silent, a new question emerged. What do we do with an entire armored empire? The Sherman story didn't end in 1945. What came next was unprecedented, a second life spanning 3 decades, 7 continents, and conflicts from frozen Korean mountains to scorching Middle Eastern deserts. This is what happened to America's Sherman tanks after World War II. By summer 1945, the United States Army faced a staggering inventory problem. Thousands of Sherman tanks sat in depots across the American Southwest, muddy European fields, and Pacific staging areas. Some were brand new, engines barely broken in. Others were battle-scarred veterans, armor pockmarked by German 88mm rounds. In California's Mojave Desert, fields of Shermans stretched to the horizon. Similar scenes unfolded in Texas, Kansas, and across occupied Europe. But this wasn't 1918. Soviet tanks were rolling through Eastern Europe, and the Cold War was beginning. Military planners faced a brutal calculation. The M26 Pershing was already in production, pointing toward bigger guns and thicker armor. Yet scrapping 50,000 functional tanks seemed wasteful. The solution would ensure Sherman tanks remained on battlefields for another 30 years. Near Caen, France, German prisoners worked in U.S. Army strip-out yards. The process was methodical. Remove radios, periscopes, machine guns, engines, anything usable. Then cutting torches reduced the hulls to scrap metal. At Deutsche Werft in Hamburg, the scale was staggering. This former U-boat shipyard became the primary disposal site for Allied armor. The economics were harsh. A Sherman that cost £12,000 to build had a scrap value of just over £1,000 by 1946. Sometimes, cutting up a tank cost more than the resulting steel was worth. Yet not every Sherman met the torch. June 25, 1950. North Korean T-34-85 tanks smashed across the 38th parallel. Within days, Seoul fell. Communist armor rolled south virtually unopposed against Republic of Korea, forces equipped with nothing but outdated trucks. In Tokyo, General MacArthur's headquarters erupted into crisis. North Korea had committed 150 T-34 tanks, devastating against an enemy with no armor. American infantry rushed to Korea, found themselves helpless. The situation was desperate. The U.S. Army faced an embarrassing reality. It had demobilized its Far East armor. M26 Pershing tanks existed, but only stateside. Getting them to Korea would take weeks. Time was a luxury South Korea didn't have. The solution came from Japan's surplus depots. 58 M4A3E8 Sherman tanks, the Easy 8 variant with improved suspension and a 76mm gun, had been sitting in storage since the war. On July 17th, the Army formed the 89th Tank Battalion. By August 1st, these Shermans were rolling off ships in Busan. Skeptics had ammunition. The Sherman was 5 years obsolete. The T-34-85's 85mm gun could punch through Sherman frontal armor at range. On paper, it looked like a mismatch. But paper doesn't account for crew training or tactics. At Masan, Shermans went straight into action. American crews, many of them Europe veterans, faced T-34s in point-blank engagements. The Easy 8's 76mm gun could penetrate a T-34 at combat ranges. Superior optics gave American gunners a crucial advantage. From July through November 1950, those Shermans eliminated 41 enemy tanks. As the Chinese intervention changed the war's character, Easy-8s became infantry support vehicles. In Korea's mountains, where tanks couldn't maneuver like in France, the Sherman's reliability became its greatest asset. Some commanders, given the choice between newer M26 Pershings or Shermans, actually preferred the Easy-8. Lighter weight meant better maneuverability, it burned less fuel, and any mechanic could fix it. By 1953, Shermans had been replaced by M46 Pattons, but their unexpected return proved something crucial. With the right upgrades and skilled crews, even an obsolete tank could dominate a modern battlefield. While American Shermans fought in Korea, several Middle Eastern nations were acquiring surplus tanks and beginning ambitious upgrade programs that would extend the Sherman's combat life for decades. Throughout the 1950s, various Middle Eastern armies received surplus M4 Shermans from American and French stockpiles. Some had been salvaged from North African battlefields, literally pulled from scrapyards where they'd rusted since 1943. Many arrived armed with obsolete 75mm guns and unreliable gasoline engines, but regional military planners weren't content with obsolete hand-me-downs. In the early 1950s, military engineers examining France's new AMX-13 light tank noticed its high-velocity 75mm cannon derived from the German Panther's legendary gun. The idea emerged: graft that powerful gun onto the Sherman's proven chassis. Thus began a series of dramatic upgrades. Between 1956 and 1964, approximately 300 Shermans were converted with the AMX-13's 75mm gun, designated the M50 variant. Later versions received Cummins V8 diesel engines, 460 horsepower of reliable power that solved the gasoline engine's maintenance and fire problems. But the upgrades didn't stop there. As regional tensions escalated in the mid-1960s, military planners needed even more firepower. The answer came in the form of the French 105mm Model F1 gun, the same weapon that would arm the AMX-30 main battle tank. Engineers shortened the barrel and fitted it with a distinctive double-baffle muzzle brake. The result was the M51 Sherman, a heavily modified variant that could engage Soviet T-54s and T-55s on relatively equal terms. This was no longer a World War II relic. These upgraded Shermans featured improved suspension, better optics, more powerful engines, and main guns capable of penetrating modern Soviet armor. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, these upgraded Shermans saw extensive combat across multiple regional conflicts. The upgraded tanks faced Soviet-supplied armor, including T-34-85s, T-54s, T-55s, and in some cases even T-62 main battle tanks. Despite being based on a World War II-era chassis, the heavily modified Shermans proved surprisingly effective. The upgraded tanks benefited from several advantages: superior crew training, better fire control systems, and high-velocity guns capable of penetrating Soviet armor at combat ranges. In desert terrain, where long-range gunnery and crew skill often mattered more than raw specifications, the modified Shermans held their own against numerically superior forces. Combat reports from the era document upgraded Shermans engaging enemy armor at night using superior optics and training to achieve first-hit capabilities. In one documented engagement, a small force of upgraded Shermans encountered a larger armored formation at close range during darkness. The resulting point-blank engagement destroyed more than a dozen enemy vehicles with minimal losses. The 1973 regional conflicts told a different story. By then, most armies had received Centurion and M60 main battle tanks, but during the desperate early phases when opposing forces launched surprise attacks, every available tank was rushed to the front lines. The upgraded Shermans, though clearly obsolete compared to modern designs, were pressed back into service. Facing newer Soviet armor equipped with guided anti-tank missiles and improved fire control, the Shermans paid a heavy price. Yet even in these desperate engagements, crews of M51 variants scored confirmed victories against T-54s, T-55s, and documented cases of eliminating T-62 tanks by targeting weaker side armor with precisely aimed rounds. By the late 1970s, the upgraded Shermans were finally retired from most frontline services across the region. Some were transferred to allied nations or militia forces. Others were sold to South American countries where they continued serving, some refitted with different armament, until the late 1990s. The Middle Eastern Sherman upgrades represented something remarkable, proof that with engineering innovation, better training, and tactical adaptation, even a decades-old design could remain combat effective against modern threats. It was a testament to the Sherman's fundamental soundness and the ingenuity of military engineers working with limited resources. Shermans spread across the globe like no other armored vehicle in history. The Philippines deployed 16 M4A1 Shermans to Korea as part of UN command. This small Filipino force augmented Allied armor during the war's desperate early days. India and Pakistan both inherited sizable Sherman fleets. When these nations went to war in 1965, Sherman tanks fought on both sides during the Battle of Asal-Uttar. Indian Shermans served until 1971. France used Shermans extensively in Indochina and Algeria. Canada operated Shermans during the Korean War, then converted old hulls into Kangaroo armored personnel carriers that served into the 1960s. In South America, Shermans became the backbone of multiple armies. Cuban exile forces used them during the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. Argentina developed the Sherman Repotenciado, reinforced Sherman, re-engining tanks with French 520-horsepower diesel engines. Several went to Paraguay in the 1980s. Paraguay holds a special distinction. In 2018, the Paraguayan Army finally retired its last 3 Sherman Repotenciados from active service. These tanks, based on World War II-era hulls, had served with the Presidential Escort Regiment in Asunción. Their retirement marked the end of the Sherman's 76-year operational history, the longest service life of any tank ever built. Think about that. In 2018, 76 years after the first Sherman rolled off the assembly line, these tanks were still in active military service. A design conceived before America entered World War II had outlived the Soviet Union, outlasted the Cold War, and survived into the age of smartphones. Back in the United States, thousands of Shermans sat in desert storage depots. As new tank designs emerged, the M46, M47, M48 Patton series, and eventually the M60, most would never see service again. By the late 1950s, scrapping accelerated. Steel that once rolled through France now became rebar for highways, structural beams for skyscrapers, or raw material for automobiles. Some Shermans found unexpected civilian careers. Canadian companies converted Sherman chassis into industrial equipment. Rock drills for logging roads in British Columbia, heavy-duty load carriers for electricity transmission line construction. In California, one company used an M4A3E8 as a building destroyer in the late 1960s, knocking down entire swaths of Oakland houses with 30 tons of tank and gravity. Farmers purchased demilitarized Shermans for a few $100s and converted them into tractors. Military collectors acquired running Shermans for about the price of a used car. Today, preserved Shermans fill museums worldwide. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans displays a Ford-built M4A3 from 1943. The Tank Museum at Bovington houses Michael, the very first Sherman delivered to Britain under Lend-Lease in 1942. The greatest irony? Today, a fully restored running Sherman commands prices between $250,000 and $400,000. In 1946, you could have bought one for $500. 49,324 Sherman tanks were built during World War II. Thousands were destroyed in combat or scrapped immediately after. But 15 to 20,000 found second lives around the world. They fought in Korea, Middle Eastern conflicts, Indo-Pakistani wars, and dozens of smaller engagements. They were converted into recovery vehicles, artillery tractors, bridge layers, and engineering vehicles. They became the armored backbone for nations that couldn't afford newer designs. And in several countries across the Middle East, they were transformed through ambitious upgrade programs that pushed the design far beyond its World War II origins. The Sherman achieved something no other tank has matched: 76 years of operational service. A soldier who crewed a Sherman at El Alamein in 1942 could have watched, as an elderly man, as the last Shermans were retired in Paraguay in 2018. The story of what happened to America's Sherman tanks after World War II isn't just about surplus disposal. It's about the enduring legacy of good engineering, the desperate ingenuity of nations fighting with limited resources, and the strange paths history takes. Those 30-ton machines, built by American workers who never saw combat, ended up fighting in wars their builders never imagined, on battlefields their designers never contemplated. Today, the few that survive in museums stand as monuments not just to World War II, but to an entire era of warfare, to American industrial might, and to the simple fact that sometimes the weapons we think are obsolete just need a new battlefield to prove their worth. If you enjoyed this hidden chapter of tank warfare history, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from the greatest conflict in human history.